This is Rummy's Corner. Marvelous Marvin Hagler is the featured boxer in this edition of the Top 5 Notable Wins series. Hagler is universally recognized as one of the greatest middleweights of all time, and indeed, he is regarded by many as the very best during the long, rich history of middleweight boxing. So let's go through a quick chronology of what I consider to be the top 5 notable wins during the marvelous career of Marvin Hagler. On September 27, 1980 at Wembley Arena in London, England, undisputed WBA, WBC middleweight world champion Alan Minter put his championship on the line against Marvelous Marvin Hagler. This was the second defense for Minter, and for Hagler, this was his second chance at the World Championship, and this was something Marvin believed he already rightly deserved. Things began with both boxers getting a feel for the range, and before long, they were both throwing in combinations. The two southpaws were looking to work the jab, and they were each using it to try and create bigger punching opportunities. Hagler and Minter were clubbing away at one another in close, and they were both landing some stinging shots. Things settled into a more tactical rhythm where Minter's longer reach was giving him some success jabbing at range, and the champion would sometimes charge his way inside and attack. In round 2, Hagler started finding ways to land some sneaky sharp shots, many of them right hooks and straight lefts. Some major fireworks soon erupted, and Hagler was almost always getting the best of these exchanges, and Hagler was consistently landing the heavier blows. But even as Hagler's technical superiority was becoming quickly apparent, Minter was absorbing a beating and still trying to battle back. And to his credit, Minter was still having moments, but Hagler was the one who was commanding the action. This trend continued into the third, and another firefight soon broke out with both of them clubbing away. Hagler landed a pair of powerful leaping rights, and Minter appeared to be in some serious trouble. Hagler was attacking relentlessly, and he was chasing Minter all across the ring. Referee Carlos Berrocal stopped the action so the ringside physician could examine Minter's eye, and the fight was stopped. Marvelous Marvin Hagler had just become the new, undisputed WBA, WBC middleweight champion of the world, and unfortunately, a rather ugly incident broke out with fans throwing beer cans into the ring, denying Hagler of his rightful moment of triumph under the spotlight. On June 13, 1981, at the Boston Garden in Boston, Massachusetts, undisputed WBA, WBC middleweight world champion Marvin Hagler put his championship on the line against former middleweight world champion Vito Antwermo. The two first met just over 18 months earlier when they battled it out in a hard-fought contest that resulted in a somewhat controversial 15-round draw. This time, the roles were reversed with Antwermo in the role of the challenger. The action began tactically, with both boxers looking to refamiliarize themselves with one another. Less than a minute into the opening round, a clash of heads caused a cut on the hairline of Antwermo. Hagler soon started firing off a snappy jab, and Marvin held the technical advantage in the early going. Prior to the start of round 2, it appeared that the fight might well be over, as Freddie Brown and the rest of Antwermo's corner were going wild. Referee Davey Pearl was eventually able to get his corner out of the ring, and after an unusual delay, the action resumed. Round 2 started with a heightened sense of intensity. There was a lot of inside scrapping that saw both boxers trading in close quarters, but Hagler was usually landing the crisper shots. When things reverted back to range, Hagler was peppering Antwermo with tremendous precision. Hagler was mixing up his attacks well, and he seemed to be in control at every range and distance. This trend continued, and Antwermo's face began to swell, and he suffered a few more cuts and abrasions around the eye, unrelated to the cut on the hairline from earlier. In round 3, Hagler began smashing the damaged area of Vito's face with a piston-like jab that was repeatedly nailing the mark. Hagler drilled the off-balance challenger with a superbly timed short left that sent Vito down. He quickly rose and didn't appear badly hurt, but Hagler was boxing brilliantly, and he started stinging the former champion repeatedly. To his credit, Antwermo was game and he never stopped trying, but he was never able to establish any real type of rhythm. And whenever he tried taking the action to the inside, Hagler was outmaneuvering him and winning the battle of position and angles. Hagler continued his dominance in the fourth, and he was repeatedly getting off first. Antwermo was trading with Hagler whenever he could, but by this point, the right side of Vito's face was almost as badly damaged as the left. Hagler was simply carving him up, and despite his best efforts, Antwermo was offering little meaningful resistance in return. Prior to the start of round 5, Freddie Brown informed referee Davey Pearl that the fight was over. It was a 4th round stoppage victory for Marvelous Marvin Hagler in the second defense of his middleweight crown. On November 10, 1983, at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada, undisputed WBA, WBC, IBF middleweight world champion Marvin Hagler squared off against former 3-division world champion Roberto Duran. Earlier that year, Duran had re-established himself as a major attraction with a dominant victory against Davey Moore. And for Hagler, this was his first big-money, high-profile fight under the spotlight in the capacity of a major attraction. It was a tactical start here, where Hagler and Duran were both using a lot of feints and a lot of movement, and they were each trying to establish the range to get their jabs working. There was a lot of mutual respect being shown, with both patiently boxing in hopes that the other would lead and take the initiative. But since both boxers were primarily looking to create counterpunching opportunities, there was a lot of posturing and a lot of maneuvering for position, but not a whole lot of punching. Whenever Hagler and Duran found themselves in close quarters, it usually resulted in intensely heated exchanges where both boxers were swinging away. But most of the time, these exchanges were brief, because they were both still embracing tactics that were ideally designed to create openings for counterpunching. This led to some long stretches where Duran and Hagler were both boxing patiently on fairly even terms. But every now and again they were standing toe-to-toe and brawling at close range. During the middle rounds of the contest, Hagler started consistently doing the better work. Duran was still fighting well in spots, but Hagler's superior strength was giving him an edge, and Marvin was putting his punches together exceptionally well on the inside. The champion was simply overpowering Duran, but for whatever reason, Hagler never seemed to really press the issue. Marvin remained very patient, and while he was unloading whenever he found himself up close on the inside, Marvin was otherwise perfectly content on keeping things on the outside, where he was trying to showcase his tactical prowess. Hagler was trying to coax Duran into attacking, but Roberto was onto him. Incredibly, there was no real sense of urgency with Hagler's measured conservative approach. This enabled Duran to begin working his way back into the fight, and they continued tactically battling it out in competitive fashion. In fact, a rejuvenated Duran was actually boxing beautifully at times, with all of his offensive and defensive skills on full display. But Hagler finally turned up the heat to regain control, and Marvin finished the fight strong. Duran was bravely shooting back during that final stretch, but he was enduring a great deal of punishment on the inside, and Hagler was administering some hurtful shots in close. The sheer physicality of Hagler had worn Duran down, but to his credit, Roberto absorbed everything Hagler threw at him, and he went the full 15-round distance in a competitive affair. When the verdict was announced, Hagler was awarded a close but unanimous decision victory. The official scorecards were 144 to 142, 146 to 145, and 144 to 143, all in favor of the champion, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. On April 15, 1985, at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada, Undisputed WBA, WBC, IBF middleweight world champion Marvin Hagler put his titles on the line against former two-division world champion Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Tommy was looking to become a three-division world champion, and Hagler was still on a quest to command the respect and recognition that his considerable talents rightly deserved. The atmosphere was intense, and Hagler and Hearns stared coldly at one another as referee Richard Steele was providing his pre-fight instructions. Right out of the gate, there was an almost immediate explosion of fireworks. Hagler was moving into attack, and Hearns clipped him with a really good shot, and this ignited a crazy exchange that saw the Hitman land a number of good right hands. Hagler was hurt and he grabbed on to stop the assault. When action resumed, Hearns tried to press his advantage, and he was firing off hard shots from long range. But Hagler charged in low like a bull, and he tagged Hearns with a couple of really nice lefts. And then all hell broke loose. Hearns began circling away trying to keep the champion at long range, but Hagler continued pressing forward looking to pounce. Marvin eventually managed to get Hearns pinned in the corner, and he had no intentions of letting him out. Marvelous began firing away in tight quarters as the two boxers traded while maneuvering for favorable position. Hagler was doing a good job of smothering Tommy's punches, but Hearns eventually was able to fight his way out of the corner. And this led to another explosive exchange that saw both boxers swinging for the fences. They fiercely battled it out until the bell sounded to end a crazy first round of action. Hearns started boxing more to begin round 2. Tommy was bouncing around and using ring space to try and keep the action at a distance where he could fire off a long jab. Hagler was stalking Hearns, and he was pressing forward relentlessly, but Tommy was doing an excellent job boxing off the back foot and keeping Hagler at arm's length. Marvin was still finding the range to land some isolated shots, but Hearns was doing a very good job of sticking and moving. Hagler was eventually able to close the gap, and once in close, he did some good work inside. The trend of Hearns boxing from range and Hagler stalking continued into the third round. Richard Steele briefly halted the action so the ringside physician could examine the cut on Hagler's eye, and when action resumed, the Marvelous One had a renewed sense of heightened urgency. Hagler bowled his way in towards Hearns, and he nailed him with a big right hand that had the Hitman stumbling. Tommy smiled at Marvin, and Hagler charged right after him. Another big right sent Hearns timbering down, and he was badly hurt. Hearns slowly but bravely rose to his feet, and Richard Steele didn't like what he saw, and he called a halt to the contest. It was officially a third round technical knockout for Marvelous Marvin Hagler. On March 10, 1986, at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada, undisputed WBA, WBC, IBF middleweight world champion Marvin Hagler put his championship on the line against undefeated challenger John the Beast Mugabe. All of Mugabe's 25 victories had come inside the distance, and Mugabe was also the #1 ranked middleweight by all three major sanctioning bodies. Things began with Hagler starting off out of an orthodox stance, as both boxers were looking to discover their range. There was a lot of bobbing and weaving from both guys, but not much jabbing, as Hagler and Mugabe were both looking to find openings for power shots. Mugabe was the one who started finding the early openings, and he was unloading with some really snappy shots that were finding the mark. Hagler came out for round 2 fighting out of his natural southpaw stance, and this paid off as Marvin nailed Mugabe with a double left under and over. Hagler began jabbing more effectively, and he was finding more opportunities off the jab, but Mugabe was finding some nice openings as well. Mugabe and Hagler were both bombing away at one another, to the head and to the body, and they were both taking just as well as they dished out. The match had evolved into a tactical slugfest with a lot of explosive moments. At times, the two engaged in a battle of the jabs, where Hagler usually had the advantage. But every so often, one of them would unload with a fiery short combination. Hagler's technical superiority usually saw him getting the best of these exchanges, but Mugabe was standing his ground, and sometimes he was both attacking and countering effectively. This made for some really exciting action, with two determined foes looking for openings to land bombs. This pattern continued, and despite the fact that Hagler and Mugabe were each landing some big punches, neither guy was cowering away from the action. Round 6 saw a lot of fireworks erupt when things reverted into an all-out phone booth brawl, with Hagler and Mugabe both trading away ferociously. Marvelous Marvin was out slugging Mugabe in tight quarters, and he started savagely landing a great abundance of punches. The tremendous assault from Hagler began taking its toll, and the challenger's legs looked weakened from all of that punishment he was absorbing. But not only did Mugabe manage to remain on his feet, he was also able to finally fire back with some menacing shots of his own. This high-energy atmosphere was providing a true battle of attrition. While the pace and tempo cooled down from the barn burner action in round 6, things remained pretty heated. Referee Mills Lane deducted a point from Hagler in round 7 for a low blow, and after that, the intensity and determination from both boxers continued to be on display. Things steadily reverted back to earlier form, where it was largely becoming a tactical slugfest. Hagler's jab was dictating the pace, which was frequently interrupted by short, heated attacks with some good counters mixed in. Mugabe was having fewer moments, and Hagler was the one being more active and more effective, even if Mugabe was firing off some nice shots whenever he could. In the 10th round, Hagler began landing a lot of short, chopping, punishing shots, and this accumulation of punishment appeared to be taking its toll on the challenger. By the 11th, Mugabe was in retreat mode, and Marvin was pressing his attack. A series of big clubbing shots from the champion wobbled and dropped and exhausted Mugabe. Mugabe was down, and he would not be beating the count. It was an 11th round knockout victory for Marvelous Marvin Hagler in what turned out to be the final title defense during his incredible championship reign. So those are the 5 wins that I settled on as being Hagler's most notable. And before I rank them, I think it's worth mentioning that Hagler had several other victories that can definitely be switched around with a couple that I selected. First, there was the fight against Wilfred Scypian, where Hagler won the newly formed vacant IBF belt. Hagler beat Scypian by 4th round knockout. You can make a case for the title defense where Hagler scored a 6th round stoppage against Tony Simpson. I also believe you can make a strong case for either of Hagler's victories against Mustafa Hamsho. These were all very solid victories for the Marvelous One, and I suppose you could even make a case for his 10th round stoppage against Juan Domingo Roldan, where technically speaking, Hagler rose from the canvas after suffering the only official knockdown in his career. And of course, with Hagler, it's hard to talk about Marvin without mentioning the highly disputed, extremely controversial loss against the great Sugar Ray Leonard. Officially, Hagler lost that fight, but it's certainly worth noting that an awful lot of people believe that Hagler deserved the victory against Leonard. And had Hagler gotten the nod that many believed he deserved, that would obviously change things up here. But based on the 5 wins I selected, number 1 is clearly the victory against Tommy the Hitman Hearns. I mean, there's no doubt whatsoever that that is clearly Marvin's signature victory, so it's easily his most notable win. Incredible victory, that one. Number 2, I would go with the win against Minter when Hagler first won the middleweight championship. It was a long and arduous journey for Hagler to finally claim that championship, and he did so in magnificent fashion. Number 3, I'm going with the Antwermo rematch. Hagler was firing on all cylinders in that one, and he put forth an exceptional effort against a man who had battled him to a draw previously. It was a somewhat controversial draw to be sure, but Vito did make a good account of himself in that one, and he came on strong late in that fight. So the dominant victory against a former middleweight champion ranks 3rd for me. Number 4, John the Beast Mugabe. By the time this bout happened, Hagler was clearly on the slide. His reflexes weren't the same, his head and upper body movement weren't as good, and he wasn't nearly as quick on his feet, but Hagler still had incredible determination, and he was as tough as they come. I think this is a victory that tends to get underrated as time passes. And number 5, the victory against Roberto Duran. I know a lot of fans don't rate this victory very highly, but I think this is another one that tends to get underrated as time goes by. Duran was a very special talent, even if his best days were south of middleweight, but he was the only one to go the full 15-round championship distance after Marvin won the title, and this bout was important for Marvin because this was his first truly high-profile fight. And that's how I see it. So who do you think were the top 5 notable wins for Marvelous Marvin Hagler? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and have a great night.